Hello, hello! What a lovely morning it is. How are all you folks? How are all you folks doing today? Okay, so it's not official yet, but I am pretty confident that I will be moving to Seattle late this summer. And I'm looking forward to it like no other. I love Hanover, I love New Hampshire, and it will forever have a special place in my heart, and I will definitely miss it here. But it's time for a change. I am not made for small town living on a long term basis. I've only ever been to Seattle one time while road tripping with my best friend. And while we only spent a single day in the city, I fell in love instantly. I remember bamboo growing out of the sidewalks as we walked towards the waterfront, Mount Rainier looming off in the background, and I thought, what a magical place. Anywho, I clearly love it there, and I believe it to be a great next step for me. I will miss a lot of people here, but I hope it works out. Whenever I tell people, it seems like half of them will say, "But it rains so much there, what the heck?" And to that I say, I enjoy rain. Also, turns out not even close to the wettest city. Seattle gets plenty of rain, yes, but according to the American Council on Science and Health, these cities get more rain per year than Seattle. New York, New Orleans, Miami, Memphis, Houston, Atlanta, Nashville, Boston, Baltimore, Cincinnati, Charlotte, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh. And that's only 13 of the 31 cities that receive more rain per year than Seattle. Irrelevant information? Probably, but now you know it too. Speaking of, what a twisted history Seattle and the whole of Washington and the Pacific Northwest have. When talking about serial killers and true crime, the Northwest is always near the top. But we have to be careful about creating biases or false narratives. According to Seattle PI, quote, "It may seem like we have more serial killers here, but in terms of raw numbers, that's not the case. People think we're the serial killer capital of the world, but we are not. Places like California, Texas, and New York have more serial killers than we do. And rainfall, bitches. However, per capita, the Northwest is high. That's according to Dr. Stephen Egger, an associate professor of criminology at the University of Houston and author of the book, The Killers Among Us. Egger believes that the Northwest has a certain attraction for serial killers. Basically, because of all the wilderness you have up there, you have so many different places where bodies can be hidden. Lots of ravines, dark wooded areas, the endless mountain ranges. It goes on and on and on. Crime author Ann Rule says it may be that serial killings in the Northwest are heard about more because detectives there are possibly better at identifying patterns thanks to the high-profile cases of the past. She also adds, serial killers are quite competitive. They take a certain pride in having the biggest toll. And maybe because we get so much publicity up in the Pacific Northwest, maybe they come out here to where their heroes operated. It's an awful thought, but I think it's one of the things that we have to consider. The Medium article I came across elaborates on this point much better than I ever could. Media attention can both help and hinder investigations. While public awareness can lead to tips and information that aid law enforcement, excessive media coverage may also create misinformation or impede upon the investigation process. Public perception and fear generated by media coverage can influence behaviors such as increased caution, changes in routines, or heightened security measures, affecting public safety. While the Pacific Northwest has seen notable cases of serial killers, it is essential to avoid the overgeneralization and acknowledge that serial killers can emerge anywhere. Factors such as population density, geography, climate, media coverage, and biases in reporting may contribute to the perception of a higher concentration of serial killers in this region. It is crucial to rely on comprehensive data and careful analysis when studying criminal patterns to avoid perpetuating stereotypes and creating misconceptions." End quote. But before I start to bore you, let me introduce you to one of the oldest serial killers Washington State has to offer. Today, I bring you the Cowlitz Killer. My name is Eli, and this is Murder in the Morning. My sources for today come almost entirely from a newspaper article published at the time of these events, and the rest was scattered about Wikipedia and a couple other sources I'll put down below. Let me take you back to the time of the dinosaurs, 1899. On November 22nd, in the town of Kelso, Washington, near the indescribable Mount St. Helens, the sun had just settled over a small farm run by William B. Shanklin. His property stretched through the forested slopes of Brannan Mountain, only interrupted by the casual cattle fence. The sound of a distant gunshot echoed across the silent landscape, surprising no one of that time or location. Survival still frequently depended on hunting or defending their land from predators. However, half an hour later, when smoke and flames bellowed up from the Shanklin's property, his neighbors grew concerned. And as they approached the house, concern quickly turned to fear. The farmhouse was beginning to go up in flames. One man who reached the fire first shouted for Bill or William over and over with no response. Nowhere to turn, and with help not on the way, a few of the onlookers rushed inside this burning building, desperately searching for their friend and neighbor. Bill Shanklin was found unmoving, face down in the kitchen. His rescuers dragged him from the smoke-filled home, and in the glow of the flames, they realized why he'd been trapped inside and never left. Shotgun pellets were embedded into his charred neck, face, and upper torso. It was clear that he had been gunned down before the house went up. A neighbor quickly saddled up his horse and disappeared into the night, heading for the sheriff's office miles away. In the following few days, an investigation into Bill Shanklin's death began. His neighbors and close friends said he was a kind man, without debt, and for the most part, he kept to himself and his animals, going into town every so often for supplies. However, a neighbor did mention Bill coming into a small sum of money, roughly $25 to $50, which doesn't seem like much, but it was a lot of money back then, over 100 years ago, and the investigators could not locate this. When the autopsy came back, it was 100% determined he was killed before the fire, as there was no smoke in Bill's lungs. Besides a cause of death, a bit of missing money, the investigators hadn't a shred of evidence. The flames had destroyed almost everything inside, and the neighbors who had come to help had accidentally destroyed any tracks that the killer may have left behind outside. A thoroughly frustrating crime scene. Quote, Deputy Studebaker, who later became sheriff and made an enviable record for solving difficult crimes, said solemnly, "This doesn't shape up as a casual murder by somebody who just happened along. I think this thing was carefully planned and executed. If the people out there aren't holding back any information, I can't for the life of me see any motive." Sheriff Kirby remarked, "And that makes it a pretty tough nut to crack. It appears we've got a lot of digging to do, so we better get started." End quote. I feel like Kirby was just the basis of every 20th century detective ever. They headed into town to hear what the Kelso locals had to say about Shanklin. As it turns out, apparently he had gotten into a scuffle a week or so back involving a younger man and his girlfriend. Allegedly, Bill Shanklin had flirted with her, and the boyfriend didn't appreciate that. The two fought it out for a bit, and the boyfriend ended up swearing revenge on Bill. The young man in question, Ted Parker, a 20-something-year-old who happened to be working around the corner at a local grocery store. Kirby and Studebaker hopped across the street to interview this character. And Ted didn't deny fighting the man or even swearing revenge on him. So the officers asked where Ted was the night of the 22nd, to which he replied, "I was working." Confused, Ted asked the officers what had happened, and Kirby explained the situation to him. His response, "I wish I had been the one," meaning he was sad that he missed out on killing Shanklin. Anyways, Ted's alibi checked out. He had been working late into the evening during the fire, and was subsequently eliminated as a suspect. Kirby and Studebaker would continue following any leads they came across, but after months and months without progress, the investigation fell to the wayside. Quote, on the morning of Thursday, November 29th, a little more than a year after the Brain and Mountain slaying, Chet and Ward Rice, two teenagers, were sent by their mother to the home of their nearest neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Cornelius Knapp, Knapp, 3 miles west of Castle Rock in the northern part of the Cowlitz River Valley, to borrow some flour. The Knapp home was approximately a quarter of a mile from the Rice place, and the boys romped over the fields rather than going by the way of the old military road that connected the two properties. This route led them to the back of the neighboring farmhouse, and the moment they got inside of the kitchen door, they saw that the screen had been torn open. Hurrying closer, they found smears of blood on the back stoop, and startled, they peered in through the shattered screen and glimpsed this elderly couple lying on the floor in a pool of crimson blood. The boys ran down the road, and half the distance to their home, they encountered Walter Edmonds, a cattle buyer who was on his way to the Knapp farm to see whether the old couple would buy any animals or sell. Learning what the lads had seen, he spurred his horse into a gallop and a few minutes later entered the rear of the building. End quote. There was no doubt that the couple was dead, and in the absence of any weapon near the bodies, it led him to believe that they were murdered. Edmonds raced to alert Sheriff Kirby and notify him about this horrific scene. Kirby, Studebaker, and a coroner arrived at the house less than 2 hours later. They found that the victims had been slain with a number 1 buckshot, which had caught the man in the throat and his wife behind her left ear. Quote, the coroner's estimate that the death had occurred between 6 and 7 o'clock the previous evening was substantiated by the fact that the kitchen table held a partially consumed dinner and the couple had tumbled from their chairs after being shot. This time, there was no question as to the motive for the attack, since the entire premises had been prowled. The pockets of the farmer's trousers had been pulled inside out, the drawers of all the furniture in the house had been opened and rummaged through, as if the intruder had been searching for anything of value. The circumstances were so similar to those surrounding the murder of Bill Shanklin that Kirby and Studebaker quickly concluded that the same person was responsible. The same type of buckshot had been used in each instance, the victims had been ambushed while eating supper, and robbery undoubtedly had spurred each attack. End quote. With a renewed determination to find this killer, they went out and re-examined every inch of the Knapp property. Soon, they came across a set of tracks leading towards the forest. Eagerly following these faint footsteps, the officers quickly reached a river, and on the bank, recent marks of a boat having been parked there caught the officers' attention. The Knapps didn't own a boat, nor had the neighbors used theirs the day of the murders, and Kirby knew he was onto something. He questioned the neighbors again, asking if they had seen any boats in the river that day. Luckily, one man did. He saw a young man on a small skiff, paddling with determination in the direction of the Knapp residence. They thanked the man and headed to the boat landing a few miles upstream between Castle Rock and Kelso. Thankfully, the, quote, boatman in charge had been there all week as he owned the joint, and when asked about a young man on a small skiff, he replies, quote, I saw at least a dozen skiffs or so upstream last Wednesday, but the only fellow who had a shotgun was Martin Stickles. He always has it, though, because he makes his living hunting and fishing, end quote. Stickles, known to wear a cap, was a Cowlitz County native in his early 30s who lived on a barge, or a scow, anchored a mile or so south of Kelso near the mouth of the river. He never had been involved in any trouble as far as the informant knew, but Kirby wanted to pay him a visit anyways. They found Martin cooking dinner that evening, and he was happy to answer any questions. He said he took his skiff up the river the Wednesday of the Knapp murders to get supplies from town, but past that, he'd stuck around his house. Having nothing arrestable, the detectives, again, left empty-handed. As they rode home that night, Kirby couldn't shake the feeling that Martin was somehow connected to these crimes. Why would he have a shotgun on the river? The next day, feeling extra determined, the officers rode back into town to double-check Martin's alibi, as good detectives do. As they spoke to the people of Castle Rock, he learned that yes, Martin went into town for supplies, but those supplies were very specific. As it happens, Mr. Stickles had purchased a case of number 1 buckshot shells, the exact ammunition used in the 3 murders. In addition to this enlightening information, the detectives also learned that Martin had bragged in prior months about, quote, having something that the sheriff's been looking for, which is a bit cryptic, and I assume he was redneck. Is that still appropriate to say? The officers looked at each other and, without saying a word, hastily sped off in the direction of Martin's home. Now, for a second time, they arrived at his door. Quote, although darkness had set in, the officers hastened to Stickles' moorings and went aboard, again encountering him in the cabin preparing a meal. Without explaining their mission, they began an inch-by-inch examination of his interior. A few minutes later, Deputy Studebaker discovered a trap door beneath the battered stove over which the suspect was cooking. Martin's face remained frozen as the detectives opened the small panel and began withdrawing articles from this hidden compartment. They found a silver pocket watch with the serial number filed off, a hunting knife, several pieces of cheap jewelry, and a box of number 1 buckshot shells. Immediately, Stickles was taken into custody, blaming everything on another man named Ben August, and that he was only keeping those items safe. However, Kirby and Studebaker knew that they had their man. They knew he was lying, and it wouldn't be long until this nightmare was over. Martin Stickles was born on February 7th of 1870 in Adams County, Iowa, but he was taken to Washington State when he was 18 months old when his entire family moved. According to his mother, Martin was born a, quote, sickly child who would always get mad at everyone without any reason and was considered, quote, unnatural. Little is known about his life before the murders, but by the time of the killings, Stickles was living on this barge sailing along the Columbia, Cowlitz, and Cowaman rivers, earning his life as a fisherman. According to Wikipedia, while awaiting trial for the crimes at the Pierce County Jail in December, the prisoners were visited by members of the Salvation Army. After one of their sermons, apparently moved by the preacher's words, Martin Stickles decided to convert to the Christian faith and admitted then and there before the priest that he alone had committed all the murders. Despite the looming possibility of a death sentence, Stickles remained cheerful and claimed that he would be happy with whatever sentence was imposed on him by the court. On the date of his arraignment, he pleaded not guilty. His lawyers and family claimed that Martin should be treated leniently as he was of unsound mind and had always been, again, unnatural. Despite this, after only an hour of deliberation, the jury found him guilty, and Judge Miller sentenced the defendant to hang. On January 25th of 1901, Martin Stickles was brought to the gallows, and after delivering a short speech to the attending parties, the rope was then put around his neck, the drop sprung, and he was killed almost instantly. Almost. The drop was miscalculated, resulting in some of his neck flesh being torn off and blood spurting from the wounds. After a few short minutes, the physicians checked for a pulse and confirmed that Stickles was dead, turning over the body to his family for a burial. And that, my friends, is the story of Martin Stickles, aka the not-so-friendly fisherman. Long story short, super pumped to move to Seattle. Thank you for listening in. And after the music, we've got a special bonus story, so stick around. Okie dokie. Bye-bye. Alright, I'll be honest. It's not a special bonus story. It's just a bonus one. I lied to you. I love highlighting exoneration stories, and today is no different. Titled, California Woman Says Her Bloody Bedroom Was Not a Crime Scene, by Dina G. of CBS News. Jane Dortick reported her husband Bob missing the evening of Sunday, February 13th, 2000. She told the San Diego County Sheriff's Department she had last seen him that afternoon when he said he was going out for a jog. Bob Doretick's body was found early the next morning on the side of the road, several miles from their Valley Center, California home. He had been bludgeoned in the head and strangled. It was obvious to me that it was a homicide, said Sheriff's Detective Rick Empson. Investigators quickly determined Bob wasn't killed where his body was found because there wasn't enough blood there. And when they searched the Doretick's home, they found spots of blood all over the bedroom. Jane Doretick explained that Bob had had a nosebleed recently, and also they had dogs who would bleed. Authorities quickly dismissed her explanations because there was no question in their mind that this assault occurred in the master bedroom. 3 days after Bob's body was found, Jane Doretick, who was 53, was arrested for his murder. She later posted bail, and though she was under a cloud of suspicion, she invited 48 hours into her home in the year 2000. It felt like a nightmare, and I kept saying to myself, when am I gonna wake up? When am I gonna wake up? She asked herself. When the case finally went to trial in May of 2001, prosecutor Bonnie Howard Reagan described the 20 locations where investigators found blood. There was blood on the comforter, there was blood on the pillow, on the wall behind the bed, there was blood on the ceiling above the bed, she said. Howard Reagan also told jurors that there was a large blood stain on the underside of the mattress. The prosecution theorized that Jane Doretick hit her husband with an object in the bedroom and strangled him. She then dressed him up in his jogging suit, put him in their truck, and dumped him along the side of the road where his body would be found. Howard Reagan told the jury, "The evidence will show that all this blood that has been described to you, the observations made in this bedroom, that it was all sent out for DNA analysis, and it all came back as Bob Doretick's blood." The jury deliberated for 4 days before finding Jane Doretick guilty, and she was sentenced to 25 to life. She told CBS in an interview from jail or prison, I can't see my way clear to a life in prison. I just can't see it." She spent years behind bars asking for a new examination of the evidence. She argued authorities focused on her from the beginning and failed to follow other leads. But motion after motion was denied. In 2016, she began working with a team from the Loyola Project for the Innocent. They reviewed the bedroom blood evidence the prosecutor told the jury was fully tested and was all Bob Doretick's. According to the appeal, not every single spot in the bedroom believed to be blood was in fact tested. Instead, only representative samples were tested. The appellate team says that several blood-like stains on items including the pillow, the nightstand, and a lampshade turned out to not be blood, and some stains on the bedspread, which were described at trial as Bob Doretick's, were never even tested at all. If you look at all the pieces of the evidence that Loyola was able to absolutely take apart, and yet we know what was told to the jury in the original conviction, how can that happen? Jane asked in her interview with CBS. The state stood by its original investigation, maintaining the bedroom was the murder scene and that the evidence still pointed to Jane Doretick as the killer. It also claimed the defense arguments were, quote, largely derived from speculation and misstatements of fact, end quote. In April of 2020, Jane Doretick was temporarily released from prison due to COVID health concerns. During that release, the San Diego County District Attorney's Office recommended her conviction be overturned due to new evidence in the case. But in October of 2020, it made the decision to retry her. The judge ruled that the new trial should go ahead, but that some key evidence presented in her original trial would not be admissible. 2 years later, in May of 2022, just as jury selection was about to begin, the prosecutors dropped the charges. Deputy District Attorney Christopher Campbell said, "We no longer feel that the evidence is sufficient to show proof beyond a reasonable doubt and convince 12 members of the jury." But it was sufficient 12 years ago. At a news conference outside the courthouse, Jane expressed her relief. It's overwhelming to realize that now I can determine my own future. It's something I've prayed for and hoped for, she said. End quote. Yay! But then, who did kill her husband? And will the case be reopened? And will anybody get in trouble for anything? I mean, come on. 48 Hours focused an episode on her only 2 days ago, Saturday, I think. And you should go watch that if you want to learn a wee bit more about this puzzling case. But that is all from me today, folks, and my iPad's at 5%. Again, thank you for taking the time and listening to me today. I hope you all have an extraordinary week. Okie dokie. Bye-bye. Love you.